You've been waiting, watching, trying to figure out if what you're feeling is real or if you're just imagining things because the person you're falling for doesn't say much. They don't text first. They pull back right when things start to feel warm. And you're sitting there questioning everything, questioning yourself, questioning them, questioning whether any of this is even worth it. And then something shifts, something small, something so subtle you almost miss it, and your whole nervous system goes on high alert. Here's what nobody tells you about avoidant attachment. The people who have the hardest time getting close to someone are also the ones who show the most when they're falling. Because for them, every tiny move is massive, every small gesture costs them something, and if you don't know what to look for, you'll miss it completely. Stay with me because by the end of this, you're going to understand something about avoidance that most people spend years trying to figure out, and it's going to change the way you see everything they do. If this is already making you think of someone specific, drop the word falling in the comments right now. Let's see how many of us are in this exact situation. Now, let's get into it. The first thing you need to understand before we even talk about the signs is this. Avoidant attachment is not a character flaw. It's not someone being cruel. It's not someone playing games with you. It's a deeply wired survival strategy that developed long before you came into the picture. When someone grows up in an environment where closeness felt unsafe, where needing people led to disappointment, where being vulnerable led to pain, the nervous system learns something very specific. It learns that distance is protection, that independence is survival, that needing someone is a weakness. So the avoidant adult becomes someone who genuinely craves connection but is terrified of it at the same time. They want intimacy, but the moment it gets real, the moment it gets close, something inside them sounds an alarm, and that alarm says run, pull back, disappear, create space. Now this is not them being cold. This is their nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do, protect them. So when an avoidant starts falling for someone, what happens is genuinely fascinating from a psychological standpoint because the pull toward you starts to fight with the pull towards safety. And you can see that fight if you know what you're looking at. The signs I'm going to talk about are not big dramatic declarations. They're not grand romantic gestures. They're not late-night confessions, because that's not who avoidants are. The signs are small. They're behavioral. They show up in patterns over time. And if you're in your head about whether this person likes you, these are the things you need to be tracking. Let's start with the first one. They start remembering the small things you said. And I don't mean the big stuff. I don't mean they remember your birthday or your job or where you went to college. I mean the small stuff, the throwaway stuff, the stuff you mentioned once in passing and completely forgot you even said. You mentioned 3 weeks ago that you hate ice in your drinks, and they remembered you talked briefly about a show you used to watch as a kid, and they brought it up again. You said something offhand about a fear you have, and weeks later they reference it in a way that shows they've been thinking about it. This is significant. Here's why. Avoidants are not checked out. They are actually hyper-observant. Because when you grow up in an environment that was unpredictable, you develop this very sharp radar for reading people and situations. You learn to pay attention. You learn to notice everything, but you don't always reveal that you've noticed. So, when an avoidant starts to fall for you, their natural tendency to observe gets directed entirely at you. They're cataloging you. They're storing details about you. And the fact that they're now letting those details slip out, the fact that they're referencing things you said, that is them letting you see that they've been paying attention. That is them choosing to be seen. For someone with a void and attachment, being seen is one of the most terrifying things in the world, because being seen means being known. And being known means being vulnerable, and vulnerable means exposed, and exposed means potentially hurt. So when they say something that reveals they remembered something small about you, they are taking a risk, a real one. In their nervous system, that moment of I remembered what you said cost them something. It opens a small window into the fact that they care. And caring is scary for them. Pay attention to this sign, not just once. Track it over time. If they keep doing it, if details you've shared keep coming back up, that is not coincidence. That is someone who is paying very close attention to you because you matter to them. Now, let's talk about the second sign. They start reaching out with no real reason, And this one is huge for avoidance specifically because it goes against their default programming in a significant way. Avoidants don't reach out unnecessarily. Their baseline mode of communication is functional. They respond, they reply when needed, they engage when there's a clear purpose. They are not the person sending "hey, thinking of you" texts. They're not the person who calls just to chat, because casual reaching out requires them to show initiative. And showing initiative reveals interest, and revealing interest feels dangerous. So if you notice that an avoidant is suddenly finding reasons to contact you, pay attention to what those reasons actually are, because they're going to be thin. They're going to be almost laughably flimsy. They might send you a meme. They might share an article. They might ask a random question that they definitely could have Googled themselves. They might mention something they saw that reminded them of you. None of these things feel like declarations of love. But that's exactly what makes them important, because for an avoidant, reaching out with no real reason is the equivalent of someone else showing up at your door with flowers. It's that significant internally, even if it doesn't look that way from the outside. What they're doing is creating contact while maintaining plausible deniability. The meme isn't a love letter, the random question isn't a confession. But what they're actually saying underneath all of it is, "I was thinking about you and I wanted to connect with you." They just can't say that directly yet. Maybe not ever if they're in early stages. So, they say it through the side door. Watch for the frequency of this too. Once or twice means nothing. But if you start noticing a pattern where they're consistently finding reasons to be in your orbit, consistently creating small moments of contact, that pattern is telling you something important. Now let's move to the third sign, and this one requires you to understand something about the avoidant's relationship with their own inner world. They start sharing things about their past or their inner life voluntarily, unprompted. Small things, yes, but real things. Avoidants are incredibly private people, not because they have nothing to say. Actually, it's the opposite. They often have incredibly rich inner lives, deep thoughts, complex feelings, a lot of unprocessed experiences. But they have learned through their early attachment experiences that sharing these things is dangerous, that people won't hold them carefully, that vulnerability leads to pain. So, they become skilled at staying surface level. They can be charming. They can be interesting. They can have great conversations. But there's a wall, and most people never get past it. Avoidants are expert wall builders. So when an avoidant starts to lower that wall even slightly, it's a big deal. You might notice they mention something about their childhood, something about a difficult relationship in their past, something about a fear they have or a way they struggle. Or they might not go deep. They might say it almost casually, like it's not a big deal, like they're just making conversation. But you need to understand that what just happened is not casual. They chose to let you in. They chose to share a piece of their real self with you. And for someone with avoidant attachment, that choice is enormous. It's like them handing you something fragile and watching to see what you do with it. The way you respond to these moments matters tremendously. By the way, if you make a big deal of it, if you push for more, if you make them feel like they just opened a door you're now going to charge through, they will shut down immediately and possibly pull back entirely. The right response to an avoidance vulnerability is calm acknowledgement, receiving it warmly but without overwhelm, matching their energy rather than escalating it. That's how you make it safe for them to keep the door open. But the sign itself, them choosing to share, that is them falling. That is them letting you closer than most people get. Don't underestimate it just because it doesn't look dramatic. Let's go to the fourth sign. They start getting uncomfortable around other people who show interest in you. Now, this is interesting because avoidants typically don't like to claim people. They don't like to label things. They don't like to make things official because official means committed, and committed means trapped in their nervous system's language. They resist ownership. They resist dependency on both ends. But here's the thing. When they're falling for you, something starts to override that resistance, something very human and very primal. They start to feel something about the idea of you with someone else. And because they can't just say that, because saying it would require acknowledging that they care, they express it indirectly. They might go quiet if someone else flirts with you in front of them. They might make a subtle comment about the person who texted you. They might bring up someone who seems interested in you in a way that's trying to be casual, but isn't quite landing as casual. They might suddenly become more present, more engaged, more attentive right after a moment where you got attention from someone else. This is not jealousy in a toxic, controlling sense. This is the emotional signal of someone who is developing feelings they don't know how to handle yet. The feelings are real, the attachment is growing, but their toolkit for expressing it is limited. So, you see it leak out sideways. If you notice an avoidant behaving differently around your other connections, if there's a subtle shift in their energies when someone else enters the picture, that's not nothing. That's their internal world showing up on the outside, even when they're trying to keep it hidden. The fifth sign is one that a lot of people miss because it looks like progress followed by regression. And if you don't understand avoidance psychology, it feels crazy. It feels like you're on a roller coaster. But once you understand it, it actually makes perfect sense. They start pulling back right after a really good moment between you two. And instead of this being a sign they don't care, it's actually a sign that they do. Here's what happens. You have a great conversation, a real one, deep, connected, warm. You feel it, they feel it. There's something undeniably real happening in that space between you. And then the next day, they're distant, they take forever to reply, they're cold or flat, or just not there in the same way, and you spiral. You think you did something wrong, you think it didn't mean what you thought it meant, you think they're gone. But here's what's actually happening in their nervous system. That closeness, that warm, connected, real moment triggered their attachment alarm because intimacy feels threatening to the avoidant nervous system. Even good intimacy, even wanted intimacy because it represents vulnerability, it represents need, it represents a potential for pain. So the closer they feel, the more their system says danger, and the more danger the system registers, the more it pushes for distance. It's an automatic response. It's not a choice they're making consciously. It's a deeply ingrained protective mechanism that activates precisely when things feel good and real. The pullback after connection is not them rejecting you, it's them regulating. It's their nervous system doing what it always does when closeness gets too close. The fact that the good moments are getting better, the fact that the connections are getting deeper, means the pullbacks will temporarily get more intense too because the stakes are rising in their system. If you see this pattern, if you notice that the distance follows the warmth, that's not a red flag. In the context of avoidant attachment, it's actually a sign that the connection is real enough to trigger their deepest fears, which means you've gotten somewhere real with them. The way to handle this is not to chase, not to panic, not to blow up their phone, not to demand an explanation. Give them the space they're seeking. Hold your own nervous system steady and trust that if the pattern is genuine, they will come back. And they usually come back a little warmer, a little more open each time they return. Now, let's talk about the sixth sign, and I want you to really sit with this one because it's the most subtle and also the most meaningful. They start making small but consistent accommodations for you in their life. Not grand gestures, not big changes, small ones, barely noticeable ones, but consistent avoidance guard their freedom intensely. Their time, their space, their routines, their independence. These are not just preferences, they are armor. They are the walls that keep them feeling safe. When they let you into their time without a functional reason, when they shift something to include you, when they choose to spend their limited social energy on you consistently, that is them making room for you in a way that goes against their deepest protective instincts. It might look like this. They mention something coming up, and for the first time they seem to want you involved. They adjust their schedule to see you even when it's not convenient. They make a small inside reference that shows you've become a fixture in their thinking. They introduce you to someone in their life, even casually. They include you in something they normally do alone. None of these look like love confessions. None of these are the sweeping romantic gestures you see in movies. But in the avoidant love language, these accommodations are enormous. They are the equivalent of someone who never lets people in, saying, "I'm letting you in." They're just saying it through behavior instead of words. This is also why it's so easy to miss. Because if you're waiting for the dramatic declaration, if you're waiting for them to show up and say, "I have feelings for you and I want this to be real," you might wait a very long time, That's not how avoidants communicate their developing attachment. They communicate it through presence, through small, consistent choices to include you, through the accumulation of tiny decisions that all point in the same direction. Now, I want to zoom out for a moment and talk about something important, because this conversation would not be complete without addressing the reality that exists alongside all of these signs. Recognizing that an avoidant is falling for you does not automatically mean that things will be easy or straightforward, or that the relationship will give you what you need. And I think that's a genuinely important thing to hold at the same time as everything else we've talked about, because here's what can happen. And you see the signs, you understand the psychology, you give them space, you're patient, you're calm, you're the person who gets it. And you might still end up waiting longer than is healthy. You might still experience confusion and inconsistency in ways that take a real toll on your nervous system and your sense of self. You might still find yourself doing a lot of emotional labor to accommodate their patterns without getting a lot of reciprocal effort. Understanding why someone does something doesn't mean you have to endlessly tolerate it. Understanding avoidant attachment is meant to give you clarity, not permission to abandon your own needs in service of someone else's healing journey. There's a question worth asking yourself honestly, and it's not, does this person have feelings for me? If you've been paying attention to the 6 signs we just talked about, you might actually have a clearer answer to that question. Now, the more important question is, what do I actually need in a relationship? And is this person with where they are right now capable of meeting those needs? Because there's a version of this where you see all the signs, you know they're falling. And you also recognize that their pace and their patterns are causing you genuine pain. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Avoidance can genuinely care and still be unavailable for the relationship you need. And holding both of those truths at once is hard, but it's honest. I'm not saying walk away. I'm not saying stay. That's a decision that only you can make with full knowledge of your specific situation, your specific person, your specific needs. What I'm saying is that understanding someone's attachment patterns should make you more informed, not more resigned to being treated in ways that don't work for you. Let's also talk about what happens when these signs show up together, because individually, any one of them could be explained away. They remembered something small. Maybe they just have a good memory. They reached out with a flimsy reason. Maybe they were bored. They pulled back after a good moment. Maybe they were just busy. But when you start seeing multiple signs stacking up over time, when you start seeing a pattern where the small things keep happening consistently, that's when you have something real to work with. One sign is a data point. Multiple signs over time is a pattern. And patterns are where the truth lives. If you're sitting there right now running through your mind, counting which of these 6 signs you've seen in your person, and the answer is 3 or more showing up consistently over weeks or months, that's meaningful. That's not you being delusional. That's not you seeing what you want to see. That's data. And I want to say that to you specifically because one of the cruelest side effects of being in something with an avoidant is that you start to question your own perception. You start to think, maybe I'm imagining it, maybe I'm projecting, maybe I just want this so badly that I'm reading things into nothing. And that self-doubt can be genuinely destabilizing. You're not crazy. If you're seeing consistent behavioral patterns that align with what we've talked about today, those patterns are real. Your perception is real. The thing you're feeling is responding to something real. The challenge is not in whether it's real. The challenge is in what you do with real. Because here's what I want you to understand about avoidants who are genuinely falling for someone. They need a very specific environment to move forward. They need to feel like they won't be consumed. They need to feel like their freedom won't be taken away. They need to feel like vulnerability won't be weaponized against them. They need to feel like they can go slow, and that slow will be respected, not pathized. If you create pressure, they run. If you issue ultimatums too early, they shut down. If you make them feel like they're failing you, their nervous system interprets that as confirmation of everything they feared about closeness, and they protect themselves the only way they know how. But here's the other side of that. You also cannot just wait indefinitely. You also cannot abandon your need for reciprocity and clarity. You also cannot become someone who walks on eggshells indefinitely just to keep an avoidant comfortable. That's not a relationship, that's a performance, and no one can sustain a performance forever. The sweet spot, if there is one, is this. You hold yourself steady, you don't chase, you don't cling, you don't make their emotional unavailability the center of your world. You keep living your life, pursuing your interests, seeing your people, doing the things that make you whole. And within that, you remain open and warm to them. You receive their small gestures with genuine appreciation. You respond to their vulnerability with calm steadiness. You give them space when they need it without making them pay for needing it. And you also know your limit. You know at what point waiting stops being patience and starts being self-abandonment. You know what you need for a relationship to feel real and good and sustainable, and you don't compromise that core need away no matter how much you care about this person. That's the balance. Holding both things open to them, rooted in yourself. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in these conversations about avoidant attachment, and that's the experience of the avoidant themselves during all of this. Because I think it's easy to frame avoidance as the ones causing difficulty, as the ones who are complicated, hard to read, hard to get close to. And from the outside, from the perspective of the person who wants more closeness and isn't getting it, that framing makes sense. The pain is real, the confusion is real, the longing for more is real, but inside the avoidance experience, something else is happening. They're not indifferent, they're not choosing to be withholding out of cruelty. Many avoidants are genuinely in conflict. Part of them wants what you're offering. Part of them wants closeness and connection and love. That part is real. But there's another part, an older part, a more deeply wired part that is terrified of exactly what the first part wants. Living with that internal war is exhausting. Being simultaneously pulled towards someone and frightened of them, wanting to reach out and being unable to. Feeling something real and not having the language or the safety to express it. Watching yourself pull back from something you want and not fully understanding why many avoidants are not even fully conscious of this dynamic in themselves. They haven't had language for it. They haven't had someone help them map it. They just experience themselves as someone who needs a lot of space, who gets uncomfortable when things get too close, who struggles to stay when relationships become intense. They might even judge themselves for it. They might wonder why they can't just be normal, why they keep self-sabotaging, why closeness feels like a threat. Understanding this doesn't mean your needs matter less. It means you're seeing the full picture. You're seeing a person who is struggling with their own wiring, not a person who is strategically making you suffer. And when you see the signs we talked about, the small memories, the flimsy reaching out, the tiny vulnerabilities, the subtle jealousy, the post-closeness pullback, the quiet accommodations, you're seeing someone fighting that internal war on your behalf. You're seeing someone whose fear of closeness is being slowly overridden by their feelings for you. That's not nothing. That's actually kind of extraordinary. But again, it has to be paired with your own clarity about what you can sustain and for how long. Because admiring someone's struggle doesn't mean your needs disappear. Let's talk about the difference between an avoidant who is growing and one who isn't. Because this distinction matters enormously if you're thinking about whether this is something worth investing in long term. An avoidant who is growing, even slowly, will show movement over time. The signs won't be static, the signs will increase. The walls will lower even incrementally. The moments of connection will deepen even if they're still followed by pullbacks. The accommodations will multiply. The sharing will become slightly less surface level over time. The pattern, if you look at it over months rather than days, will show trajectory. Not a straight line upward, but an overall movement toward you. An avoidant who is not growing will show you a flat line or even a declining pattern. The moments of connection won't deepen. The walls won't move. The sharing won't increase. The accommodations won't grow. You'll notice that you're always at approximately the same level of closeness, no matter how much time passes or how much effort you put in. This distinction is critical because patience is a virtue with someone who is slowly moving, but patience with someone who is static is not patience anymore. It's waiting for something that isn't coming, and this is where your own inner work becomes essential. You need to be honest with yourself about which pattern you're actually seeing, not the pattern you hope is there, not the pattern you're rationalizing into existence. the actual pattern over actual time. Our brains are remarkably good at finding evidence for what we want to believe. We highlight the moments of connection and downplay the long stretches of distance. We remember the warmth and minimize the coldness. We give enormous weight to one good conversation and forget 3 weeks of nothing. If you want to see this clearly, write it down. Literally, keep track, not obsessively, but honestly, what happened this week, how they showed up or didn't, what you noticed. Over time, the actual pattern becomes undeniable, whether that's a pattern of slow growth or a pattern of stagnation. And that truth, whatever it is the thing you deserve to see clearly, because you cannot make good decisions about your own life based on wishful thinking. You need data. You need pattern. You need honesty. Let me also address something that comes up a lot when people are navigating this. The question of whether you should say something, whether you should name what you're seeing or feeling, whether you should have the conversation. Here's my honest take. The timing and approach of that conversation matters enormously with an avoidant. Too early and you spook them, too late and you've wasted your own time, too intense and they shut down, too casual and they don't take it seriously. The right moment is when you have enough of a foundation that the conversation won't feel like it's coming from nowhere, but before you've invested so much that you're making decisions from a place of fear rather than clarity. It's also a moment when you feel grounded in yourself, not anxious and desperate for a certain answer, but genuinely curious about where this person actually is. And the right framing is not, "I need to know where this is going," which creates pressure and can trigger their flight response. It's more like, "I've really valued what's been building between us, and I'm curious where you're at with it." That opens a door without demanding they walk through it immediately. It's an invitation, not an ultimatum. How they respond will tell you a lot. Not just the words, the energy. Whether they engage or deflect, whether they show up to the conversation or immediately create distance from it, whether they're honest about their uncertainty or whether they go completely cold. Pay attention to the whole response, the words and the behavior after, because with avoidance, those two things don't always align. They might say something that sounds reasonably open in the moment and then pull back dramatically afterward. That pullback is information too. It's their nervous system responding to the increased intimacy of having had a real conversation about real feelings. Give it a little time after that conversation. See how they come back, because they usually do come back. And the coming back, the returning, is often where avoidants show you the most truth about where they actually are. I want to come back to something I said earlier about the love language of avoidance, because I think it's worth sitting with this a little longer. We live in a culture that has very specific ideas about what love looks like. It looks like words of affirmation spoken freely and often. It looks like grand gestures. It looks like availability. It looks like someone who pursues you eagerly and clearly. It looks like someone who makes you feel wanted in ways that are unambiguous and consistent. Avoidants often don't speak that language, not because they don't have love to offer, because their love language is behavioral, not verbal. It's in the small, consistent things. It's in what they remember. It's in who they make time for. It's in the moments they choose to stay when every instinct in them says leave. If you translate their language directly, if you're willing to read behavior rather than waiting for words, you might discover that someone who seems to say very little is actually saying quite a lot. But here's the honest addendum to that. Some people need words. Some people need verbal affirmation and emotional expressiveness to feel loved, and that is a completely legitimate need. There is nothing wrong with needing someone who tells you how they feel clearly and often. There is nothing wrong with needing verbal reassurance. There is nothing wrong with needing the kind of communication that comes naturally to people who don't have avoidant attachment. If that's what you need, and an avoidant, even one who is genuinely falling for you, cannot provide that consistently, that's a compatibility issue worth taking seriously. Love is not enough on its own. The capacity to meet each other's core needs matters enormously for long-term sustainability. Know yourself as well as you're trying to know them. Know what you actually need. And be honest about whether what's being offered, even if it's real, even if it's genuine, is actually enough for you. That's not cold. That's not unromantic. That's self-respecting. And self-respect is the foundation of any relationship worth having. Let me bring this home now because we've covered a lot of ground together, and I want to leave you with something that actually lands. The 6 signs we talked about, them remembering the small details, them reaching out with no real reason, them sharing pieces of their inner world, them showing discomfort around others who want you, them pulling back right after a real connection, them making small, consistent accommodations for you in their life. These are not guarantees. They're not a formula. They're a map. And maps help you navigate, but they don't make the journey easy. If you see these signs consistently over time, you're not imagining things. Something real is developing, something that costs them something to give, something they're choosing despite the fear. That matters. You matter enough to them that they are fighting their own deepest protective instincts. That's the thing about avoidance falling for someone. It's not passive, it's not easy. It's an active fight against everything their nervous system has trained them to do. And the question is, what do you do with that? You hold your own. You stay rooted in yourself. You receive what they're offering with genuine warmth. You give them the space they need without abandoning your own needs. You keep your eyes open. You watch for pattern. You trust your own perception. You stay honest with yourself about what you need and whether this is moving toward that. And you don't shrink yourself. You don't make yourself smaller to make them more comfortable. Because a real connection, even between 2 people with very different attachment styles, has to have room for both people to be fully themselves. That's what you're looking for. Not just signs that they're falling, but signs that where they are and where you are can meet somewhere in the middle and create something that actually works for both of you. You deserve to be chosen clearly, consistently, by someone who, even if it takes them longer to get there, is genuinely moving toward you. Pay attention. Be patient with yourself. Be honest with yourself.